The researchers also concluded that females were much more likely to receive a diagnosis of anxiety, depression, or another mental health problem, more likely to be diagnosed antidepressants than men, and really just misdiagnosed or underdiagnosed. But the workplace really focuses on outcomes rather than what it takes to get there, and that's a real challenge, a real hidden challenge for female leaders who have ADHD.
Welcome back to the Haroon Rabbani podcast, and today we are going to dive deep into the area of ADHD. There's a topic that really is close to my heart because guess what? I've got a mother, I've got a sister, I've got two sisters actually. One of them's got severe ADHD. I've got friends and colleagues, particularly colleagues I work with who have ADHD and happen to be female. So we are looking into the topic of how ADHD affects women in particular. Welcome back, Dr. Alia Jaz, forensic psychiatrist, specialist in ADHD.
Hi, Haroon. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me back again. It's a real pleasure.
Because we've got so many questions to go through, so many issues we want to cover, let's just dive straight in. Why are women, girls, I'm talking about girls as in, under 18, why are women and girls misdiagnosed or not even diagnosed with ADHD?
Well, this is a fact. It's not a myth. It's not something that is just trying to be female friendly, so to speak. And I'd like to jump right into a very recent study from 2024 in Wales. And it looked at the sex differences in ADHD diagnosis and clinical care. So it was a national study. And that looked at everyone that was diagnosed with ADHD between 1989 and 2013. And the results were staggering, really. It showed that there was a preference for boys to be diagnosed at a ratio of 4-1. And that was increased the younger the child. So the highest it went to was 5-1. So every 5 boys diagnosed to every 1 girl under the age of 12. I mean, they got towards adults, that ratio got a bit closer, 2-1. So for every 2 men, there was 1 female that was diagnosed. And we know that you just don't develop ADHD in adulthood. So there's this big dearth of missed diagnosis, missed opportunities. And that's just fact. And that's just shown by the research. The researchers also concluded that females were much more likely to receive a diagnosis of anxiety, depression, or another mental health problem, more likely to be diagnosed antidepressants than men, and really just misdiagnosed or underdiagnosed for these clinical reasons. So we're just not equipped as medical professionals to identify ADHD in young girls, young women, older women. It's really a massive challenge. So it is a scientific fact that less women are being diagnosed than men when it comes to ADHD, and it's a big problem.
It's a massive problem because my own personal experience, of course, which I bring into my podcast, it's got my name in it, Haroon Rabbani Podcast, so I will bring it in. My own personal experience is discovering that I have ADHD, at least a massive portion of the symptoms by the time I'm in my mid-50s. It was absolutely mind-blowing. It caused a lot of stress for a good few months just to come to the realization that I've got it. But the fact that women are misdiagnosed or not even diagnosed, that those kind of proportions are absolutely shocking and mind-blowing. So how do the symptoms of ADHD differ from men and women? Well, that's specifically focused on women, obviously.
For sure. So I think part of the challenge is the name ADHD, because it's a bit of a misnomer when it comes to women. So the H in ADHD refers to hyperactivity, and that gives us the impression that ADHD is that young boy that's just off the rails and just can't sit still, and he's just too excitable, too aggressive, just unmanageable. In reality, that's a subset of ADHD in some boys. Most girls, women aren't very hyperactive when it comes to externally. So they often get missed because these ideas that we have or that we pick up around what ADHD should be. But in reality, women have more internalized symptoms. Girls have more internalized symptoms rather than these externalized agitation, aggression, hyperactivity. So what do we mean by that? So there's a greater sense of becoming hyper-focused with things, being too over self-critical, being overly anxious, and internalizing the energy in a negative way. They tend to be quieter, they tend to get missed in class, they tend to lose themselves in a good book or zone out or daydream. But girls are generally brighter than boys, so they tend to do fine at school. So they can pull it around when it comes to exams, either cram things last minute or just naturally because they're cleverer but do well in exams. And as we know, if you're doing okay or well in exams at school and you're not causing any chaos, then no one's going to think otherwise. No one's going to think there's anything wrong with you or that you need any extra support or encouragement. So that's a real big issue why ADHD gets missed in young girls. The symptoms are more internalized and they can look more like anxiety and depression. And that's why GPs often pick up on that rather than really what's driving it.
So if a teacher was listening or even a parent is listening, then how do they spot a young girl with ADHD if you've just mentioned the symptoms that you did, which basically sounds like, oh, this is a normal child?
Well, the key thing is having dialogue with your children. So checking in and finding out what's going on inside. Often there's other telltale signs when it comes to ADHD. There's a lack of organization. Often you have to tell your daughter child to do things several times to the point where it starts to get ridiculous. Often they're maybe clumsy physically. They forget things all the time. There's a general sense of disorganization and chaos that's rumbling in the background. So it's usually not just the the internalized symptoms, but there's other signs as well. If you have your eyes open, if you're inquisitive about your child, and if you try and engage with them in some dialogue. So it does require higher level parenting skills, or what I would expect to be a minimum, really.
So let's talk about older women who are at the workplace or they run their own business. How does ADHD show up for them, and what are the battles or challenges they have to go through?
So the issue with highly successful women in the workplace, female leaders, is that the workspace is very unforgiving. So it rewards success. It rewards material success. And what it tends to do is minimize the internal distress that it takes for women to be successful. And the reason why I emphasize upon that is that often women can mistake the internalized symptoms of ADHD, which is the high level anxiety, the high level of self-criticism, the high sensitivity to external criticism, as just part of the process. You kind of minimize all of that to say, well, this is what it takes to achieve success. And that can be a real issue because there's a cumulative process going on here. There's a point that as you neglect this side of your internal life, that you're getting closer to the burnout side of things, where you reach that tipping point. And if you're unable to bring yourself back and actually acknowledge that there's something driving this level of intensity, it's not all about success, but the workplace really focuses on outcomes rather than what it takes to get there. And that's a real challenge, a real hidden challenge for female leaders who have ADHD.
One of my sisters, I don't think she has ADHD, but again, recently at this time of recording, she's experiencing burnout. And she's one of those people, similar to me in the context of hyper focus, getting things done and giving all that she's got. But when it comes to holidays and weekends, she's like shattered. This is as a school teacher, and she's in a leadership role as well. Regarding hormonal fluctuations, I'm a man, I know nothing when it comes to hormonal fluctuations, but happy to learn. So how does the menopause and menstrual cycle, etc., how does that influence, how does that turn out for women who have ADHD?
It's a great question. I'd like to consider female physiology as being far more sophisticated than males. And a big reason for that comes to the hormones. So we talk about sex hormones like estrogen and progesterone as though they're just related to reproductive organs. But actually, I consider them as brain hormones because there's so many receptors in the brain for estrogen, progesterone, that you can't ignore it. They're neurohormones. And when it comes to ADHD in particular, estrogen is related to dopamine. It stimulates dopamine and it helps stimulate and augment executive functioning in women. So executive functioning is those higher level ways of thinking. So it's a planning, it's strategizing, it's making decisions under pressure. It's switching from task to task. So estrogen is key. But what we know with women is that there are fluctuations naturally over a month, but then over key transitions when it comes to getting pregnant, giving birth, premenopause, postmenopause, and there's a whole range of barriers that females have to navigate when it comes to the hormones and impact on their brain health. That is really not spoken about, and there's very few people talking about this. And I always feel a bit odd as a male doctor talking about female hormones, but I just don't know many female doctors talking about female hormones in this way. So I think it's really an important area to highlight, and something that's really neglected and poorly understood by medical professionals as a whole, I would say.
I mean, you're a research scientist, and that's the angle you're taking, really, is the scientific angle. So it has to be spoken about. And so, kudos to you for getting this movement going from your angle, from this corner of the world. Now, ADHD affects women in many ways, affects men in many ways, but for some reason, imposter syndrome is one of those things that seem to be a lot higher amongst women with ADHD. Why is that? And what can they do to deal with imposter syndrome?
So I would say imposter syndrome in ADHD isn't a flaw. It's a side effect of spending your life feeling out of sync. And because in general, women have more pressures on them. So we touched on the physiological pressures. They have to deal with the fluctuating levels of estrogen and how that affects brain health. They have to deal with the pressures of being the part of the human species that has to create a life and give birth to make sure the human species carries on. So they have physiological, they have societal expectations upon them, along with everything that comes with being a successful leader or high functioning female in the work environment. All of that adds distress, and being able to see yourself as someone who's highly successful, but also someone who is struggling so much, there's a disparity there. There's a cognitive dissonance. And that really fuels this idea of imposter syndrome, that actually, if I was so great, if I'm so amazing, if I'm such a great leader, then why does it take so much out of me? Why am I internally so battered and bruised? It just doesn't connect. You don't allow yourself to acknowledge your successes when life is so difficult and there's so many pressures upon you. And these things fuel this idea of imposter syndrome, that you think, actually, should I really be here? What you end up doing is externalizing your successes, and you hold on to those internal distresses that we've established are much more likely for females with ADHD. So your successes you may attribute to chance or luck or circumstance or someone else allowing you to do things or opening doors for you. So it's not to do with yourself. It's always to do with the external environment. So it's a big issue. Imposter syndrome is alive and kicking, but it's a really a side effect of not feeling as though you fit in, and life's feeling as though it's more of a struggle than it should be.
As a man with ADHD, whether it's just me or anybody else in particular, I have to say I've struggled with, I don't want to call it struggle, although struggle technically, if you look at the etymology, is about going through a process. So I've struggled with ADHD, not ADHD, but imposter syndrome most of my life. Even, by the way, even doing this interview with you, very experienced. I've worked with some of the most incredible scientists in the field of consciousness, global level. Still getting imposter syndrome. Am I? What if I sound like I don't know what the hell I'm talking about? What if I don't ask good questions? What if nobody watches this video? I think one thing we need to be clear regarding imposter syndrome, as somebody who's, I don't want to call myself an influencer, but someone in the field of business and in the space of consciousness, is this. What we see on social media, for example, what we see on stage when we see speakers, what we see written in books, people are always showing their best side. What we don't see is all the times they failed. Example, I'm a former British kickboxing champion, black belt, and I had 4 Kung Fu classes. In the first 3-4 years of my professional speaking career, I never used to mention that I was a British kickboxing champion. Because in the back of my mind, I'm remembering the hundreds of times I've lost fights, But it was only one or two times I won major competition. And so part of me didn't even want to mention it. But one of the things we can do, just generally, men or women, is with imposter syndrome, is realize that it's okay to have it. It's okay to have these fears. But then this is why it's important to have a cause, have a purpose. Let that cause. So here, the cause of doing this interview, cause behind it is to inform people who want to step into leadership, who are in leadership. It doesn't matter if you're leading a family or leading a big corporation, who have ADHD, to that give them an opportunity to shine. So I'm saying to you, listeners, viewers, is if you got imposter syndrome, be okay with it. Nothing wrong with it at all whatsoever. What do you reckon, Ali?
I agree completely. It's about naming things and understanding things. So I'd like to work in the area of reframing. So someone's given us this term imposter syndrome. I don't like it, but we know what people mean when they refer to it. I think reframing that in a more positive way without changing anything else can make a big difference. So looking at imposter syndrome in a way that we can ground it, for example, in neurobiology. Your brain is a lot more susceptible to responding in a heightened way to external pressures. This is a biological thing. This is your biological sensitivity that is there, and that it's different to someone else. And we can give it a much nicer name than imposter, because again, I think that's a bit of a misnomer. That's certainly how you feel. You feel out of place, but it's feeling, people with ADHD feel out of place in life more generally rather than just the workspace. So trying to reframe it in a way that's, I think, more positive without making any other changes can really work wonders for some.
Fellow ADHDers, I think I've come up with a genius idea. How about we change the words imposter syndrome to call it authenticity syndrome? Keep the syndrome, we'll half keep it. Why? We feel like an imposter because we're wanting to be authentic to ourselves. One of them saying, I'm a fake, I'm a fraud, I don't want to do that. The other one saying, I want to be authentic. Here's my authentic element. This is me. Show up as you are. You know, as one of the organizations I'm building, and is early stage at the moment, is a recruitment company specializing in recruiting in AI and cyber security space. So particularly graduates who've just come out of that space. And my team already, most of them are neurodivergent. And what I love about it, for example, Lizzie has autism and ADHD. And in my perspective, from my mindset, it's like, okay, if she's being herself, she's going to be very detailed, very thorough, and get everything aligned. And she'll be very quick. And if she's authentic to herself, she'll do that to the best of her ability. She's amazing, absolutely amazing. So there you go, authenticity syndrome. Thank you for that inspiration, by the way. So, time management. I've always had issues with time management. I've got a younger sister, 10 years my junior. Off the scale, issues with time management. Are there any tools and techniques women leaders can use to manage their time or deal with the concept of time far better?
Many strategies, but it's about not doing everything. It's just making one or two changes to your daily schedule and routines that can make a big difference. So the first thing we know when it comes to ADHD is that there's this sense of time blindness and lack of internal time. So being able to estimate how long it's been from one task to another can be a real challenge. So outsource that. So externalize time. So have a clock that's there. See time in front of you. Make time your best friend rather than your fearsome enemy. Use color-coded calendars, being able to manage things. Again, outsourcing that. You can't retain things enough and access them in a way where people that don't have ADHD can be a challenge. So color-coded calendars is helpful. Accepting that there may be certain times in the day where you're more productive than others. Now, with ADHD, often mornings are better. So you can front load your day. So get your more important tasks scheduled for the morning and leave those more mundane ones or easier tasks that need less capacity towards the latter part of the day. And also body doubling. So having someone there virtually or in person can really help you focus on getting things done in a way that improves your time management and your efficiency. And just having some soft accountability like that can go a long way. So these are just a few examples of many, and it's really finding what suits you in your particular workplace. But there's a lot that can be done that doesn't require much effort at all.
There's a natural segue into the next question, but I want to look at this whole concept of time. And I think we all have 24 hours drops of time in the day, every single day, 7 days a week, as long as we're alive. And I think again, back to reframing, I think it shouldn't really be called time management. I mean, I asked that question because people can relate to it. I think it needs to be more priority management. What matters most to me that needs to get done, which brings me to the next question. How can a woman with ADHD, whether she's a leader or she's an executive or work in any kind of work environment, how could you become more productive and focused and not distracted?
One of the key areas is understanding the neurobiology, first of all. So going back to the menstrual cycle, I think it's key for women in particular. For some women in the luteal phase, which is the second 2 weeks of her menstrual cycle leading up to bleeding, can be a real struggle. Identifying and perhaps tracking mood, focus, your executive functioning for someone can be a game changer. So you can try and schedule your month in ways where your biology allows you to be more productive. And it's an extra step that men don't have to do, but biology is a biology. It's very unforgiving in that way. But being in tune with your internal clock and your physiology can be really helpful. So if you're a female that has strong premenstrual syndrome that affects your executive function, which I see a lot more in women with ADHD, then being able to schedule things that aren't so intense if possible during that week or a few days leading up to your bleeding can be a great benefit and takes off a lot of pressure. So that's the first thing, understanding your biology. And once we've established that, then really looking at how you approach your work. So we know that people with ADHD are more likely to experience what we call task paralysis. So it's really getting started with tasks is a real issue. And again, that's grounded in how your brain is working, but there's many ways that we can approach that. So one of the things I always recommend is just trying to tell yourself, I'm just going to do something for 5 minutes. So you're not thinking about the whole task and the next hour or the next 2 hours. It's just doing something for 5 minutes. It takes the pressure off. And what people tend to notice is that after that 5 minute period, you tend to go on for longer, 10, 15, 20, 30 minutes. And it's a way of just overcoming that time paralysis to start making progress with your tasks in a way that is less pressurized. In addition to that, being able to schedule regular breaks is really important to make sure that you don't burn out in the day and that you don't have this exhaustion, because there's a high level of intensity for many women with ADHD in the workspace. So being able to have a break, ground yourself, reset. So whether that's through moving around, whether that's through 5 minute of journaling or doing some breath work, all of these things can help reset and reground someone so they don't get too carried away or they don't get too stressed out. And scheduling things like this within the working day, in particular between meetings, because that's another thing. People tend to have meetings back to back to back to back with no breaks in between, and you're lucky if you get a lunch break. Having these grounding techniques, moving, breathing, stretching, can really help reset and help make the day much more manageable in a way that you can be more focused and productive by the end, rather than feeling as though the longer the working day goes by, the more chaos and the less control you have over what's going on internally.
By the way, if you are somebody who doesn't know about grounding techniques or anything like that, one of the things that we're putting together at some point, we haven't set any dates yet, but I just want to know how interested you are. We're going to put on a full-on retreat to take you through processes train you up if you've got ADHD. So this is specifically for people with ADHD. So you can actually manage your life, manage your work far better. But it is a proper retreat. It's not just about workshops. If you're interested, make sure you comment below, or just when I put a quiz up there, and I will eventually put some kind of quiz there, join the waiting list, and then we will see if there's enough of you interested in this. We will put on a retreat. One of my bugbears is the amount of my loved ones, female loved ones, meaning family members, of course. I don't have lots of loved ones, harem or anything like that. But family members, close friends who've suffered from burnout. Loads of them have suffered from burnout. And I know a lot of them got ADHD. Is there, besides what you've just mentioned, what can they do about burnout? So they've already got it. And what can they do to prevent it? Anything, if there's anything different to what you've just mentioned?
Absolutely. So burnout is not a flaw. It's not a failure. It just means that you've been working full pelt without being kind to yourself and without that level of self-investment. So we tend to do that. We tend to sacrifice everything for our work success. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I don't think there's anything wrong in sacrificing things in life in order to be successful in the work environment. And as we know, women tend to have to sacrifice more than men because it's still predominantly a male-dominated work environment that most women are in. It's all about balance rather than sacrifice. As much as you're putting into your work, you need to devote a certain percentage. So we talk about 10, more near 20% of your efforts into investing in yourself and in your brain in particular. So the successes that I have with people is allowing them to understand and to prioritize their brain health. And that's a way of allowing yourself not to get to that tipping point where you're burning out. So what do we mean by brain health? Well, there's a physical component to brain health. So we're looking at, does the brain have the right nutrients, the vitamins and minerals that it needs to function? And we know that in ADHD, people are much more likely to be nutrient deficient. And when you add those nutrients in, all symptoms of ADHD improve. Are you eating well? As in not junk food, not high sugar, high carbohydrate foods, but foods that are high in fiber, fat, and protein, which can help you focus and concentrate much better in the day. Are you eating the right things? And then are you moving in the right way? We know that exercise is one of the best medicines when it comes to ADHD because it can naturally increase the amount of dopamine that's being produced. And it's not about working out until you're dead. It's not working yourself to the bone. It's about being strategic and clever, and it's having a few times in the week where you're able to work out and to really help support your brain when it comes to dopamine and overall brain health. So these are just a few examples of how someone can invest in their brain health, and these are not optional extras. I would say I think these are fundamental aspects of living, fundamental aspects of planning your working week, working month, working day, because if you don't invest in yourself, you're only going to head in one direction, and that's towards burnout. We're all made the same way. If you don't look after yourself and invest in yourself, then we're all going to get there sooner rather than later.
The way work culture is set up, particularly in the UK, and in America is worse, way worse, but in the UK, is we're expected just to not give ourselves any kind of real breaks. So my intention is within my own company is actually somehow get all the work done in 4 days, take Friday, Saturday, and Sunday off. Why? Because from the statistics already, it shows that people are actually more productive if you give them 4 days to work and then give them plenty of time off. So, let's see if we can change the culture as well. Procrastination is an issue we all face when we have ADHD. How do women who are aspiring to be great leaders or make a big difference or become titans in the industry? I'm writing a book on that. How can they deal with procrastination? What's causing it? What can they do about it?
So procrastination is a core feature of ADHD, and with women in particular, because they're juggling more and they mask better. So that's one of the key things. Women on the surface appear as though they're coping with life and coping with their work responsibilities, their leadership roles in a much better way than they actually experience. There's that disparity. It's a weight. It's a barrier. It becomes a barrier to getting things done because you can tend to feel more overwhelmed. And that's a core feature for women with ADHD in leadership roles, the weight of expectation, not only in your work environment, but in life in general. And that often feels overwhelming in a way that can get women to be stuck and find it difficult to start making a move because it just feels too much. It feels, well, I get this work task done, but I have to deal with this. I have to deal with these 10, 50 things, and it can just feel too much. So it's about acknowledging in the first instance what procrastination is, and acknowledging what aspects in a woman's life is contributing to that, and then breaking each of those down and saying, well, how can I make each of those a bit softer? So if it comes to the work environment, for example, delegation is one thing that can lighten the load and to help with that overwhelm. And that's something that people with ADHD find more difficult to do, but it's one of the best things they can do. You can outsource. The more you can outsource from your limited finite capacity, the less overwhelming you will feel, and the less stuck in this procrastination zone. So it will allow you to kind of free up and to have the energy and have that kind of drive to start being more productive. So outsourcing things like those more mundane tasks, those repetitive tasks, the admin tasks, the things that actually people with ADHD don't excel at. So if it's not your bag, fine. Find someone else that you can give it to while you can work on being creative, dynamic, and inspirational. And that's one really core feature for women with ADHD in particular in leadership roles that can really help start shifting from that procrastination, pre-action into action.
You're watching or listening, or watching and listening, the Haroon Rabbani podcast. And one of the big reasons we focus, or I like to focus on entrepreneurship, leadership, and health is they're all interlinked. Specifically, leadership and entrepreneurship, I'm a strong advocate and believer that I'm not alive here to just be a sheep. I'm not alive on this planet to be a victim of circumstance. I'm alive to actually serve, to make a difference, to create my own destiny. And I strongly believe everybody has that capacity. Everybody. Many people, not some, many will choose to abdicate responsibility. Many will choose to let circumstances dictate their situation. For example, ADHD. My sister pointed this element out regarding procrastination, regarding hyperfocus. She said, you don't procrastinate, you hyperfocus instead. I said, yeah, I don't leave room for procrastination. I give myself a break. So I choose to own what I've got and play with it. The reason we're doing all these ADHD related topics is not just because Dr. Ali Ajaz is amazing, which he is, but it's because actually I do believe it's a superhero gift. But, very big but, I don't think it's my identity. I don't think it's your identity. Having ADHD is not an identity. It's something that you have, and it's a tool, it's a vehicle, it's a situation, it's a circumstance. I don't believe it's a disease, I neither believe that it's something that should be a disability, nor do I believe it should be replaced, as instead of being called your name, so Haroon, replaced with ADHD Haroon. So why do I say that? A very good friend of mine who works with lots of professional speakers he was dealing with this one particular individual, very successful in the speaking field, discovered he has ADHD, and guess what he did? He started playing to that role. And as a result, his business more or less collapsed. Why? Because he became a victim of circumstance. So moving on, let's talk about emotional well-being. We've got so many questions I want to ask, but we just don't have time. How does somebody manage their emotional well-being if they're a woman and they have ADHD?
There's three main things I would like to say. So we touched on hormones, and I think they're very important, regardless of what stage as a female you are in your hormone life. So get your hormone levels checked, understand what's happening, work with a women's health expert. It's well worth the investment to understand what your hormones are doing and how well they're working for you, and what strategies you can put into tweak. and improve that, because there's always room for improvement. The second thing is looking after your brain health. So touched on diet, nutrition, exercise, sleep. These are really key aspects for you to really focus on and embrace, because what they do is they change core features of ADHD. They allow you to work in a more consistent way, and you bridge that gap between what you want to achieve and what you're able to achieve. And all that investment helps reduce that emotional distress. So that's working. So these two areas are working on the physiological, the biology, the neurobiology of the ADHD. The third aspect, the emotional regulation around the psyche and your mind, and often the traumas and the hang-ups that we all have, and the emotional baggage that we all have and accumulate, not only through life but also what we're going through in our work relationships and dynamics at the moment. So I think having a therapist that understands ADHD, that has experience of working with ADHD, that works on a CBT or trauma focus model, someone who's quite eclectic and experienced in their approach, I think is really helpful. So again, it's having someone where you can outsource some of the emotional distress. And what a good therapist is able to do is to rework and give you that back in a much better state than it was when you offered it in that way. So I think it's really important having professional ADHD therapeutic support, and that just allows you to be more balanced, not only physiologically but also psychologically, and gives you really a grounding and a platform to challenge some of those negative thoughts, those recurrent negative thinking patterns that have been there a long time. And I think that's really key to be able to free up from that emotional turmoil.
So how can women manage that emotional sensitivity, this whole thing of rejection? Because I know I don't like rejection. How can they manage that when they're at the workplace, or maybe even in their personal or social lives?
Rejection in ADHD, and women in particular, is really grounded in the neurobiology, that we know that the brain is oversensitive to criticism or perceived criticism. So that's the first thing. So acknowledging that there's an overreaction that is not necessarily to do with their own person, that their own personality or the type of person they are. It's to do with the biology. So that's the first thing. And the second aspect is reality testing, because in reality, female leaders have had so many more successes in their life than they have had failures. And being successful, you need to have failures along the course, but the failures aren't the things that define them. It's their successes and their ability to overcome adversity. So one thing that I think is really important is to have this reality testing, that where there's this high level of emotionality around not being perfect, not being good enough, not achieving and comparing oneself to others. But the reality is that women with ADHD in leadership roles are role models. They're exceptional. And without necessarily changing anything, it's just really testing that reality, that narrative, challenging that narrative in the mind for what is the reality. And again, having a therapist, having someone to work through that with you and to really open that curtain up and look in the mirror and actually see who's there, not someone who's driven by our anxieties, but a reality, a real picture. And that can really be liberating for a lot of women. So it's a subtle type of work, but it's grounded in a reality. It's not a fantasy, because many women are exemplars. And I look at in my own career, in my own life, the most inspirational people have always been women, from a junior doctor to a more senior doctor. In academia, I've had amazing female role models, and I have to thank in order for where I am today and the influence that they've had on me. Notwithstanding having a mother that showed you unconditional love and how that sets you up for your life. So women have a lot of things to be celebrated for, and in the workplace that's only magnified. So it's just really having that reality testing without necessarily changing anything in terms of how they work or how they function. It can be very powerful.
You already mentioned the importance of exercise and nutrition. Let's talk briefly, because we've done an entire episode on sleep, and the link is up here for those of you who want to go and click that link shortly, and you'll find the descriptions below. Talk to us about the importance of sleep in a very short summary, of course, importance of sleep for women with ADHD.
So sleep is essential. So without adequate sleep, the brain can't replenish itself. It can't consolidate memories. It can't process negative, difficult experiences. And then you're just running on reserve. If you want to feel healthy, if you want to be focused, if you want to be successful, you need to have good sleep, because it's a sleep that helps the brain regenerate. It helps the brain function. And what we know, this studies are overwhelming. People who have poor sleep have more exaggeration of their ADHD symptoms. Life is a lot worse without sleep. And some people can fall into the trap of, well, I work better at night. It's only a trap. In the longer term, your brain's only going to suffer. And when your brain suffers, everything else is worse. So if people are serious about functioning better, about making improvements in their life, it always has to start with sleep.
Yeah, try sleep deprivation instead, right? See what happens. Then,
well, we know what happens. People lose
yeah,
touch with reality.
yeah.
And there's something about us as a human species that we need to sleep. We can't survive very long without sleep. It's so key. You don't need to be an expert. You need to sleep, and we need to have good quality sleep.
Discovering you've got ADHD or even living with it most of your life is already challenging in and of itself. Are there any particular therapies or coaching methodologies you recommend which may help any of our women leaders to navigate this challenge?
The key thing is resonating with a therapist. So someone who's experienced enough, but also someone that you think you can get on with. So with all therapy, that's the key thing. Does the therapist and their personality and their just who they are and how they talk to you, does that fit with who you are, and does that resonate? Because if there's a clash, then you're only going to make limited progress. So that's the first thing. It's a therapist. And unfortunately, some people may need to shop around and experience a few therapists before they find someone that they click with in that way. But it's really important. It's well worth that. Don't be discouraged if the first therapist or coach that you work with, it doesn't quite fit. You will find someone. Most people do. And in terms of the specifics, so there's one aspect around strategizing. So having ADHD focused strategies on some of the things that we've talked about today, for example, time management and management of your biology and your brain needs. These are all important strategies. So ADHD focused in terms of strategies, that's one aspect. But then also a CBT model that looks at how your behaviors are linked with your feelings and your thinking patterns. So we know that in ADHD, thinking patterns and feelings are off the scale, and that can impact behavior. So if you're working in a CBT type model, you can actually change the intensity of how you feel by doing certain behaviors. And that's what CBT is all about, the link between these aspects of how we function day to day. So CBT model, but then also someone who's experienced in trauma-focused work, because being a female with ADHD, being successful in the workplace, I can guarantee that there's a lot of trauma that's gone on. And, we don't have to think about like a natural disaster trauma, but really difficult, intense experiences and barriers that you have to overcome. These are all traumatic. So being able to name those and to work through them enough can be very liberating. So having a combined approach where you're looking at ADHD strategies, but then also trying to manage some of the negative experiences over the course of their life, I think is a really kind of key combination and a key ingredients for effective ADHD focused therapy in female leaders.
So you are based in Canary Wharf in London, in the Docklands area. Is there any particular type of client that you work with at your clinic?
So I work with a range of people. really any mental health issues. But over the last several years, I've had a special interest in ADHD. So I work with, in particular, people who are high achieving, who have their own organizations or senior management positions, and really helping them either to stress, burnout, being able to look after their lives and their health in a way that they're more productive at work. But then also with ADHD in particular, a lot of people are coming to me with ADHD in high senior roles because of the expertise that I've developed over the years. And the principles are very similar. The way that you look after yourself, the way that you invest in yourself, and the way that you untangle some of these negative thinking, is a common thread that I see throughout. So, yeah, it is an eclectic mix, but I do really enjoy working with people in senior roles and trying to help them thrive and excel in a way that is less painful and damaging as it has been up to this point.
Is there any final message of hope you can be sharing with our women leaders or aspiring leaders who have got ADHD to close this show?
I guess the first thing and the only thing is that to acknowledge that you're amazing. I think to be a female leader in a management senior role in today's society with all the pressures that you've had to face is literally amazing. But there's a big payback in terms of your emotional health and your physical health that's happened to get to this point. It's never too late. The more you can start investing in your emotional health and your physical health can make a big difference. Things don't have to be as difficult as they have been up to this point.
Dr. Ali Ijaz, thank you very much for joining the Harun Rabbani podcast. We have been talking with Dr. Ali Ijaz. For those of you who are watching, listening, make sure you share, make sure you like, and make sure you subscribe. You know what? Please share this episode with at least one woman leader who you know amongst your family or your colleagues who perhaps might benefit in navigating their own challenges. Thanks for watching. See you next week.